Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out Podcast. It's a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, their most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. Today, I'm incredibly excited to welcome Jeremy Schifeling to the show. Jeremy is from Buffalo, New York, and at an early age, he always dreamed to play baseball for the Chicago Cubs. But he later realized that baseball just wasn't a reality, and therefore pursued a career in education, where he worked early on as a substitute kindergarten teacher. Jeremy has devoted his entire career to helping others succeed. From teaching kindergarten in Brooklyn to recruiting top students at Tech for America to leading education marketing at LinkedIn, Jeremy's touched the lives of millions of people at every stage of their journey. His ultimate pivot, though, was leaving corporate to launch his company called The Job Insider. He later published the best-selling LinkedIn and ChatGPT for job seekers on Amazon. In this episode, Jeremy shares his interesting story of how he went from kindergarten substitute teacher to launching a business and producing the most viewed videos in LinkedIn's history. So without further ado, please enjoy Jeremy Schifeling and his clocking out story. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Raven. I'm so excited to be here.
I am as well. I was so excited for our call here today. I've been spending the last few months since we connected on LinkedIn, looking at your background, and it's super impressive how quickly you've been able to adopt ChatGPT and AI into your company, The Job Insider. And, I feel like we're kindred spirits because my whole career has been around helping people ultimately land in their dream job. And the work that you're doing, I feel like there's so many connection points. And so I know that people who are listening today that are in this place where, they're trying to figure out how do you leverage technology and AI to accelerate their job search in a very meaningful way. They're going to get a lot from our conversation here today. So I'm so excited to dig in.
Awesome. Can't wait.
So Jeremy, I want to start from the beginning. Tell us, where are you from? What did your parents do for a living?
Yeah, so I grew up in Buffalo, New York, and my parents were professionals. My dad was a general practitioner, internist, and then my mom worked for a health insurance nonprofit. And so in some ways, they were always tussling over, who should get paid what and how the healthcare system should work out. But very, very typical jobs in the sense of like, if you play the game of life, those are the kinds of jobs you can spin and win on your way across the board.
So what was it like growing up in Buffalo?
Yeah. So Buffalo is an interesting place because it's actually a fairly poor city, all things considered. I think at the time it was like the third poorest city in America. And so because of its Rust Belt economy, because of its sort of struggle to transition to sort of a knowledge sector economy, it gave me a sense early on that it wasn't just enough to just rest on your laurels and say, hey, my parents made a good living, I'll make a good living. You got to work hard to reinvent yourself to see what's possible. And I've always carried that with me, whether it was a sense of just trying to punch really hard out there in the world, or even think about how can you help folks who are a little less fortunate, because I just knew so many kids growing up who had a lot less access to opportunity than I did. And so that definitely stuck with me for a long, long time.
That's interesting. So at an early age, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah, it's so funny you mention this because I was literally talking to my 9-year-old daughter and her friend this morning about this. I remember when I was 9, I really wanted to play for the Chicago Cubs. I lived in Chicago for a little bit before I moved to Buffalo. I got into a Cubs game for my first baseball game, and I just thought there'd be nothing better than playing in Wrigley Field. And then, of course, life happens, and you start to say to yourself, wait a second, I'm not necessarily the best baseball player on my little league team, let alone the best baseball player in the world. This could be tough.
So outside of sports, was there any other interests that you felt like you were going to do for a career?
Yeah, not so much when I was a kid. I think as I got to college and I start to experience all this cornucopia of opportunities in terms of different majors, different classes, that's when I fell in love with education. The idea that instead of just going up in the ivory tower and getting locked away doing research that no one's ever going to read, I got a chance to actually come down to real classrooms, help real kids on a daily basis. And so that was sort of the first big occupational passion that ever burned beyond the baseball dreams.
Wow. So how did that resonate with your parents? Like, did they have an influence on you to sort of follow in their footsteps, or did they have dreams of what Jeremy was going to do? I just wonder how much of an influence they had on your decision, and how did they react when you sort of navigated toward education?
Yeah, such a good question, because I know from having coached and worked with so many students, especially, immigrant students, international students, a lot of times you do have that pressure of like your family's expecting you to be an engineer or a doctor. I never had that. And that was a great gift that my parents gave me. But on the other hand, I didn't necessarily have a whole lot of role models when it came to being a teacher or an entrepreneur, just because there weren't that many folks in my immediate family or even my extended family who had gone down those roads. So it was kind of a laissez-faire approach of, hey, go out there into the world, find yourself, but we can't necessarily tell you what that thing is. You've got to find it on your own.
I love that. So they trusted the process for you to find your way, and sounds like they were incredibly supportive, and it seems like it paves the pathway for mistakes to be made, you to sort of learn, adapt, and continue to grow. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, and it's so hard because now I'm a parent myself, and I can see that for our generation of parents, there's this strong pressure to try to control everything. Give your kids the best cultivated experience. And yet, I think if we think back to our own experiences from childhood into those young adult years, like you said, some of the best things we ever learned, we learned through failures, mistakes that our parents didn't prevent us from making. And so I kind of want that for my own daughters now, where I want them to have the good and the bad of life, because I think that's the most potent sort of blend that helps you find that true passion.
So you had this dream of wanting to play for the Cubs. At some point, it sounds like you realize, okay, that is a dream and it's not going to become a reality. So it sounds like you locked in on education. So you graduated from Swarthmore College. What was your degree, and sort of how did you play that into the educational world?
Yeah, so definitely I had one foot in the direct service world. So I was an education major, but I was also a political science major, and I had another foot in the theoretical world. And I thought maybe I would find some way to, focus on education policy, something at that intersection of those two areas. And so that led me to my very first job out of college, as a substitute teacher in the Philadelphia suburbs, just going from school to school every morning, kindergarten, third grade, seventh grade, special ed, library, just doing all these different jobs every single day and having the absolute most intense trial by fire that education offers.
So when you say trial by fire, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I think if anyone is either recently graduated or has kids of their own, you know that kids are not kind to substitutes. The substitute walks in and it's basically open season for all the class clowns, all the hijinks. And if you imagine that kind of Groundhog Day experience of not just doing it once, but doing it every single day like clockwork, we have to win that trust anew as the day dawns.
Jeremy,
yeah.
How many years did you do that for?
Oh, this was only for 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
But I felt like it aged me because it's so intense, and my heart just goes out to any substitute teachers listening to this right now.
Oh my gosh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So out of education, where did you go from there?
Yeah, and so basically that led me first to a full-time substitute role, kind of a permanent role, where I was actually the kindergarten teacher for a teacher who had gone out on maternity leave in Primos, not too far away from you. And then finally to a full-time kindergarten teaching role in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. And I think that was when I learned probably the most important lessons, because then you didn't have the substitute teacher's advantage, which is at the end of the day, you just walk away. Instead, you had to come back to those same kids every single day, continue to garner their respect, continue to build trust, continue to bring them along on this journey that a lot of them are not quite ready to go on, and so they come along kicking and screaming.
Right. I as I think back, this whole idea of substitute teaching, I could see the very different feeling that you had, where going in for one day it's almost like you're in and out.
Yeah.
And I can see the benefits of that, but also I can see the challenges of having an extended period of substitute for 3 to 6 months. And you really have to go in and garner trust early and establish yourself early on. And that skill set's very different.
It's so true. And I think,
Mm,
one of the things that I always coach people on today who are starting their career, looking for their next stage of their career, is that flexibility piece is so critical to everything we do, right?
mm,
Whether you're a substitute teacher, whether you work in the tech industry where everything's going crazy over AI, that ability to roll with the punches is almost just like a essential part of the human experience.
mm. I love that. So I'm curious how, like, at what point working in the education space, working as a kindergarten substitute teacher, was there a moment when you realized that this chapter of your career was going to come to an end? And at what point did you start to research other fields that you were ultimately going to pivot to?
Yeah, this is really the essential moment for me because I think just like I had to come to grips at age 9 with the fact that I wasn't going to play for the Chicago Cubs, at age 21 or 22, I had to come to grips with the fact that like we all have different gifts, and
Mm,
my gifts were not the gifts of an elementary school teacher. I didn't have the gift of patience, all the stuff that you've got to do to be an amazing kindergarten teacher for 40 years. I didn't have the stomach for, and I had to face facts. On the other hand, because there's always a silver lining to every setback, I started to think about what I really was enjoying in the classroom. And that was teaching my kids how to use technology. I remember we were creating PowerPoints one day, and that was pretty fun. We created the first classroom blog that we ever had. This was back in like 2005, so it was early days for blogging.
mm,
And I was like, wow, I love doing stuff with technology. I love doing stuff behind the scenes with communication. Maybe there's something there. And
mm.
that little nugget of an idea, the little like spark of a fire, is what ultimately lit the path to the next stage, which is where I moved more behind the scenes, these other roles that were still education focused, just from a different perspective.
So what did you ultimately do?
Yeah. So basically, I'll give you an example. When I worked at iMentor, my job was not just to serve 30 kids in a classroom in Brooklyn, but to serve 300,000 kids around the world who were in these mentoring programs that we were supporting with our technology. And so that meant building out all these skill sets that I never really tapped before, whether it was market research or sales or marketing or customer success, all these things that I didn't really even have the language for at the time. I was building those muscles every single day because I had to. And again, it's one of those great experiences where people say, oh, Jeremy, can I watch a video or read something to learn about this? And I say, yeah, you could do that. Or you could just roll up your sleeves and do it right now, as uncomfortable as that is, because you're going to learn so much faster, so much deeper.
That's interesting. So was there another pivot that took place from like it, were you still in the education space, or did you completely leave the education space altogether to sort of expand your reach into this
Yeah.
new opportunity?
Yeah. So many more pivots. But basically, the big ones were that after I had this experience in New York and education, nonprofits, I kind of had that little 7-year itch of, hey, what is it like on the other side of the equation? And of course, at the same time, Google was becoming a household name and Facebook was becoming a household name. And I was like, I wonder if these guys know something that I don't. Because here I am trying to build this small little software based nonprofit into a big thing. And these guys are the biggest sort of apes in the zoo. And so ultimately, I went to grad school. I got a graduate degree in business. And then I used that to go work later at Apple and LinkedIn and Google and all these places to get a taste of what that felt like on the other side.
Wow. So when you say on the other side, though, when you went to work for Apple, Google, and LinkedIn, were you still in education mode? Like, were you now educating employees, and what was the foundation that you were building there?
Yeah. Now you hit on something really important, Raymond, because people will often say, oh, that's like 180 degrees different from where you were. But what I realized once I got there, it was all the same stuff that I've been building up, all the same skills, all the same abilities, just with a slightly bigger audience or a slightly bigger platform. Because, for example, at LinkedIn, now I was no longer focusing on 300,000 students for the mentoring nonprofit. I was focusing on 30 million students for the world's biggest professional network. So it was still very much focused on education, helping young people get their start in life, but same kind of skills in terms of how do you communicate with a large audience? How do you get people to come along with you on a journey of discovery? And so ultimately, the grass was not so much greener over on the other side as the exact same shade, just more of it.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a step back for a moment and just really dig into how did you get into working for any one of those three brands? And the reason I ask this question is I know that a lot of people that listen this show, they're in a situation where they're trying to make a career pivot. Now, they could be early in their career. Working for Google, Apple, and LinkedIn could be a desirable outcome for anyone that's listening here today. And I wonder if you can share a unique story that led you to getting any one of those jobs that's beyond just sending your resume in and it being a perfect match. And it's probably connected to some of what you're doing today, but I wonder if you can share how did you break in to one of those big three?
For sure. So I think the first thing I want to disabuse people of is the idea that like grad school is a panacea for everything. Because someone could just listen to what I had said and said, oh, I'm going to go get an MBA or this or that. And the reality is, once I got to business school, I realized, okay, I got in, but now I'm still competing with thousands of people in the same program all across the world. And so to stand out, I kind of put myself into the shoes of the hiring managers and the recruiters in the same way that I put myself into the shoes of the kindergartners and their families a decade before, and said, all right, there's no way they're going to pick this former kindergarten teacher just as is from a big pile of resumes. I just know there's nothing I can do on that resume that's going to make me look as obvious a choice as someone who worked at Google or worked at McKinsey or pick your choice. So what did I do? I said, the number one thing that someone's going to trust over a fancy brand name are their own friends and their own colleagues. And so even before I worked for LinkedIn, I was scouring LinkedIn to say, hey, who went to Swarthmore and then got a job at Apple? Who went to Teach for America, where I had worked, and now is working at Google? And by finding those commonalities, those insiders in these organizations who had something in common with me, I was ultimately able to ask them to go to bat for me, to put in a good word for me with the hiring manager or the recruiter, get a referral in some cases. And I know flat out from having talked to the recruiters, that's what got my foot in the door. It wasn't like, oh, Jeremy, your resume was so brilliant, your LinkedIn profile was so great. No way. It was like you had an advantage over these other folks, which is we actually trusted you because you came from someone we trusted.
Wow. Absolutely amazing. It sounds so easy, but the reality is that's the game. The trust factor. People hire people from people they trust.
Yes.
Over an applicant tracking system that is talking to systems where they're doing keyword matches. And I can't underscore the word trust enough because people hire people from people they trust. And that is such a fascinating story. And the fact that you came out of an industry in a field that is so completely unrelated to what you were trying to do, but did you have any struggles with it, or did anyone say were objectionable to it? Like, I just wonder what was the struggles that were limiting?
Oh, totally. And it's funny because you laid it out so beautifully, Raymond, and starting with my childhood, which is a lot of it, I think, comes from having grown up in a place like Buffalo, where you always feel like an underdog. You kind of have a chip on your shoulder that's city-sized. And so if you've always been accustomed to just having every door open to yourself and to think, oh, life is easy, maybe you say, why should I bother? Why should I go through all the hassle of doing this? Whereas if you're like, hey, these guys don't believe in me, I've got to punch a little bit harder, it actually lights this fire where you feel like you have no choice but to play this tougher, more trust-based game than just, like you said, building a nice resume that the ATS likes. Wow. So not that I would advise everyone to move to Buffalo and make that your starting point. I do think that the stuff that that holds us back, where it's like, oh, it's imposter syndrome, we don't belong, can we actually fuel that as extra fire to help us compete a little bit harder?
I love that. That's so inspiring. I mean, the whole come from a small town, blue collar, you're almost feeling like you're behind the eight ball just because of sort of your upbringing. And now you know you're competing against people who maybe are more privileged and have a different pathway. But the pathway that you chose is so real and authentic. And it definitely, I think that hard work plays forward. And so I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, there's so many life lessons there that I think people can take, especially if they're struggling right now. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And if people are struggling with their job search, I believe there's hope in your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jeremy, I want to take a moment and just talk a little bit more about the LinkedIn, Apple, and Google experience.
Yeah.
When you started with one brand, was it easier for you to pivot then and leverage the brand to go to another brand? Like once you made the break into one, it had to have been easier than to leverage that experience to move into another.
100%. And I think this is sort of the good news for folks who are doing career change right now or starting out, is this is the hardest it's ever going to be. Once you break in, once you become an insider versus an outsider, all of a sudden, to your point, Raymond, you've got that trust factor. Oh, he worked at Apple. Of course he'd be perfect for Google, or vice versa. And so just know that if you are like turned off by the idea of getting all these referrals, all this networking, you're not going to have to do it forever. But just to get that first big break, that's when you need it, because after that, you've already become a member of the tribe.
I love that. So what caused you to move away from those three companies?
Yeah. And so this is the ultimate frame. And I think this is the frame that'll probably determine the rest of my career, is after having gone through this whole journey of being from a small classroom to a mid-sized nonprofit to massive tech companies, I realized that the frame that actually felt the most comfortable for me in retrospect was that small scale work, because maybe I'm just a control freak or whatever, but I just love the idea of getting my hands dirty and building stuff from scratch. It like almost called back to this like little kid inside of me who just wanted to like take his box of Legos and build something awesome. And when I had the chance to actually build something on my own outside of the constraints of those big companies, even though it's hard, even though it's taken me a decade, like it just felt like the right place for me, because it was who I was, it was the skills I'd built, and it felt like the kind of work that I want to do from the very earliest days of my aspirations.
So I wonder though, Jeremy, was there something unsatisfying about working in the, like you said, constraints? So,
Yeah.
I feel like the corporate world people describe as there's very limiting, it's very constricting. And I wonder if there was a moment where you felt the pull away from that, and if you can sort of describe that in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, this starts with this idea of knowing yourself. Socrates said, know thyself and the rest will be easier. And I think he was onto something, because I've known a lot of people out there in the world who are incredibly gifted as peacemakers, as facilitators, as intermediaries. And in a lot of ways, that's the way the corporate world runs. Corporate world isn't about my way or the highway. It's about, let's find consensus. Let's bring these warring tribes together. Let's see if there's something we can agree upon and actually do. If you're that kind of person, this could be the perfect frame. This could be the thing that launches your career. But for me, that former kindergarten teacher who just wanted the chance to close the door and then do something really awesome without being told you can do this or can't do that, it was so stifling. And to give that specific moment, I think I ultimately ended up walking away from the Google job after just a couple months, because I was in probably the, 27th meeting of the day. And I was like, I can see why this is important. Google is this massive company, 300,000 employees. Everyone has to get aligned, but it's just not how I want to spend my time on this planet. We've got one precious life to live. I want to lead it in the way that's true to who I am. This is not it. And that was that clarion call for me, that there had to be a better way, a better frame where I could sort of use my gifts in the best possible way.
That's so well said about having one life to live. It must have been really hard. You're working for one of the largest brands in the world, biggest tech company in the world. To walk away from that, did you have an idea? Was there already a big idea formulating in your mind?
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic actually, because here's what was happening. I was working for the Google Maps team, and our focus was on supporting small businesses, helping them sort of expand their presence, get more customers, basically show up. And as I went out and talked to these small business owners, I actually started to find myself empathizing with them a lot more than my own peers at the Googleplex. And I was like, man, it would be amazing to just walk out of here, give up all the massages, the sushi, all that good stuff, and have your challenges of trying to build this vision that you have into reality. And I think that was really powerful, because it wasn't just rebelling against what I experienced inside a corporation. It was the hunger and desire to get that other experience outside those walls.
So how did you come up with the name of the company, and what propelled you into launching your business?
Yeah, so it's very autobiographical. I think some people pick businesses because they've done a SWOT analysis and they've done all this market research. For me, it was purely, hey, I've gone this journey myself. I started out as a kindergarten teacher. I moved into the nonprofit sector. I moved into the big tech sector. I had all these different experiences. If I can do that as this kid from Buffalo, I bet I could teach others to do it too. And so really the idea behind that insider moniker is that I want you, as someone who's changing careers or starting a career, to start to understand what's happening in the inside, and then how do you make yourself an insider as well. And so I think the goal is to replicate some of that experience for as many people as possible around the world.
So when you talk about being an insider, is it around networking as an insider to find a job, as far as, like, if you're in a job search right now, is it around leveraging your network with individuals who are working in various companies, and then using your network to ultimately pivot to whatever job you're looking for?
That's definitely a big part of it. But I think there's even a bigger piece, which is, to me, the job search process is probably one of the most opaque and misunderstood things out there. Like, everyone has this idea of the black box of what's happening inside the ATS, what's going on inside the interviewer's mind, how do I stand out? And yet it controls so much of our access to opportunity. Like, do we get a chance to do work on this planet that lights us up or that holds us down? And so really the idea is less about one specific technique, whether it's networking or resume optimization or whatever, and more just like, hey, let's take away, roll up the blinds, let the sunlight shine in, and show people what's really happening behind the scenes so they can control their own destiny.
So tell me about the Job Insider. What's the business model, and how do you guys make money?
Yeah, so basically it's a very simple thing of partnering with folks who need to support folks in the space. And that means primarily working with universities who say, we are doing career services at San Jose State for 10,000 first-generation college students, or, we are such and such business school, wherever you are. We want to make sure that our students have access to not just the information, but also to the opportunity that comes with that information. And so schools will hire me to train their students, their alumni, even their staff, on how to make the most of all these different black boxes.
So where does the AI come into play?
Yeah, good question. So AI has been really interesting, because when it came out a couple years ago, I was still working actually at Khan Academy back then. We were one of the early partners with OpenAI when they were launching ChatGPT, saying, hey, here's an application of how you could apply AI for education. And so I got early access about 6 months before it launched. And the first thing I noticed when I started playing around with AI is that it actually wasn't that good at education. Like, it actually made mistakes with math, like simple things were hallucinated. But it was really powerful for just pure exploration. So for example, if you said, I am a finance major who has a passion for sustainability and I love to be a team player, what are 10 specific job titles that match my interests? All of a sudden they could throw out stuff that most students had never even heard of, but were really good opportunities for them. And that was the light bulb moment when I said, hey, we've got to get this into the hands of every student, not to help them learn math, but to help them see what's possible for themselves, because no one today has access to that level of sort of intimate one-on-one coaching that AI can provide.
Interesting. So I want to go back. So you were talking about how you partner with universities and you're providing a tool that gives college students sort of this insider connection to information at companies. You talked about the blinds going up.
Yeah.
So like I'm graduating college, what exactly am I seeing that makes it unique in terms of how I'm able to find a job within a company?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically what I'll do is I'll do a workshop for those students. So let's say it's a workshop at Swarthmore College, my alma mater, which I've done a couple times. Someone comes in and they say, hey, I'm getting an art history degree and I have no idea what to do with that. And graduation is 2 months away. I don't want to move back to my mom's basement. Help. And what we'll do is we'll walk through that process of maybe using AI to explore different career options based on where art history majors have gone, then finding art history majors from Swarthmore on LinkedIn who are out doing cool jobs at museums and nonprofits in the tech sector, start to reach out, build some of the connections we were talking about, maybe get a referral, and then all the way to, hey, how do you make a case to a hiring manager that even as a 21-year-old, you could add tremendous value to their organization? And so really that soup to nuts kind of tearing down of all the obstacles, all the brick walls in a young person's way and saying, hey, you've got a straight path right to the promised land. Let's get you there as expeditiously as possible.
So the word expeditiously really resonates with me. And I think it sounds like the education that you're doing now with these students who are graduating, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And so what it sounds like what you're doing is you're providing them with tools to make them much more educated in terms of what's the possibility using AI. And so you're setting up the prompts so that they can connect their degree, their experience, their interests to the right opportunities in a way that's very expeditious. And I would imagine, Jeremy, that the clarity that they have through this process makes it really easy for someone who's graduating to connect with the first job they ultimately pursue.
That's exactly right. Because zoom back to my own experience, right? Why did I become a classroom teacher? Well, that was the only thing that I even knew about. I didn't know that there were jobs in the nonprofit sector for education. I didn't know that big tech companies had education teams. All that I stumbled into randomly. And I'm like, why did it have to take me a decade to figure this out when here in 2025, a cursory use of ChatGPT could expose you to all these things beyond what your blinders show you?
Okay, so I want you to humor me for a second.
Yeah.
And you can't use any visuals here. So the audience is listening. And you just described working with the college university. If you have an individual who's later in their career, they could be in any field.
Yeah.
They're unemployed and they have experienced that black box, that black hole where the resume goes in, they apply, they hear nothing. And they do it 100 times and feel so frustrated because they're not getting callbacks for interviews. So they don't have access to the Job Insider, but they have ChatGPT or Claude AI. What are you typing in there to get back the right information related to having a successful search?
Yeah. And I think actually what you hit on there at the end is the most important thing. You don't need the Job Insiders. You don't even need me. The reality is we have these tools at our fingertips. We just need to learn how to use them. What I would absolutely do, let's say I was just, laid off from USAID, given everything that's happening in the economy and politics. You're like, I still want to do important work for the world, but that avenue is now closed off to me, at least for now. So what I would be doing is I would go to ChatGPT, I would upload your resume, And I would flat out just say, what are 10 opportunities to leverage the skills in the attached resume to achieve my aim of international development or social justice that do not involve federal government funding, because that avenue has been closed off. And then it'll start to say, hey, what about state governments? What about NGOs? What about foundations? And you can say, okay, foundations sound pretty good. What are the top 10 foundations in America that have an international development focus? Okay, there's the Gates Foundation. There's this foundation. Okay, of those organizations, which ones are hiring, which ones are specifically hiring for these kinds of roles? You can see how just by asking the natural questions that we have as, curious individuals can take you from this black box of I'm stuck, I've hit a roadblock in my life and career, to whoa, there is so much opportunity out there. I just need to know where to look.
So what you're doing is peeling back the onion and you're asking natural questions into ChatGPT. You're getting back a very comprehensive answer. But then from there, you can further ask questions to get more refined in terms of your search. And then I guess ultimately, let's say the Gates Foundation is where you want to target. You could probably say, are there any employees that work at the Gates Foundation that graduated from Swarthmore College?
Exactly. And I'll be honest, the reality is that there are some spaces like LinkedIn, for instance, where these tools have not been able to scrape data. So it probably wouldn't be able to answer that question in particular. But then if you look up Swarthmore College on LinkedIn, my team built this thing called the Alumni Tool, and it basically gives you a directory of every Swarthmore alum. You can filter by Gates Foundation, and you'll discover there are 27 people who you could reach out to today as an insider.
That's fantastic. So, Jeremy, I wanted to ask, when you launched the Job Insider, was there a moment in the beginning of the journey where you were apprehensive around, is this going to work? And even to the extent that you said, I'm going to go back into the corporate world.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because I think even though I talked about so many career pivots, just know that the entrepreneur's journey is filled with pivots. I was dead wrong about everything I assumed when I first started out. I thought, I'm going to build a business that's focused on individual students who are graduating from college, maybe first generation college students, helping them land that first job. And then, of course, I learned the hard way. It's tough to build a business on that audience. It's a deserving audience, but it may not be enough to support a family on. Okay, I'm going to have to switch to mid-career professionals. Now I'm doing more, but still not quite enough. Maybe I switch to institutions and I do more with colleges and universities because they have a sort of replicable model. All these things were things I got completely wrong right out of the gates. But again, that willingness to evolve, to realize that, hey, I made a misstep, but that's okay. Now I know which direction to move into. I think just like it helps you in your career, it also helps you as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's so well said. The learning that you get as an entrepreneur and just being willing to recognize when it's time to pivot, when things aren't going, and then just knowing that, failures are building blocks. And then you obviously had the growth mindset to get to where you are today. So you're pioneering the ChatGPT for job search. And I just loved our conversation here today because not only are you sharing your journey from elementary substitute school teacher to working for Google, Apple, and LinkedIn to launching the Job Insider, that you're providing some practical tools today for people who are really struggling. And I think it's incredibly helpful. It's incredibly relatable. And the last question I wanted to ask is, what advice do you have for people who are really stuck and they're struggling with figuring out, what is my transition point going to be? What am I going to go into? And it's hard because they may have so many personal things going on. There's a lot of noise right now out in the world. There's a lot of uncertainty. And we're needing clarity. And so for someone who's sort of navigated through that journey, what advice would you have for people?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, Raymond, because I'm definitely feeling that pain every day. Like whether I'm talking with formerly incarcerated people who are looking to sort of get their big break into the workforce, people coming back from the military. Like, it's definitely a challenging moment for every single person out there. However, as someone who graduated from grad school at the tail end of the Great Recession, one of those lessons from that time really sticks with me, which is the sort of psychological concept of locus of control. Some people have what is called an external locus of control. In other words, you think, why is this happening to me? Why is the world out of control? I am just at the whims of fate. And I totally get it. It would be very natural to feel that way here in 2025 with everything swirling around. On the other hand, even during tough times, there are people who have an internal locus of control. It says, hey, I can't control the economy, I can't control politics, but I can absolutely control how I show up to potential employers, whether I'm reaching out to folks in the world to build relationships, whether I'm exploring what's possible beyond the usual suspects. And as a result, my challenge to all the listeners out there is definitely know that you're not alone, but know that even in the toughest of times, you have tremendous power at your fingertips to control your destiny, to have that human agency that we all crave. And so if you take some of the techniques that we've talked about, or lean on a friend who can help introduce you to folks, there's an incredible amount of opportunity and autonomy that you can still carve out, even when the winds are swirling at their hardest.
That's such great advice. That's so well said. I love that control. Even with all the noise and the messiness, people have control. They can make a choice. So, Jeremy, first of all, thank you for everything that you shared here today. I appreciate you sharing your journey and learning about your early childhood and being a substitute teacher. That was a lot of fun, sort of hearing how you navigated from that early career into the big three companies, into being an entrepreneur and launching your business. So thank you so much for being here today. How can people find you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity, Raymond. I've probably done 100 podcasts over the years, and I feel like you asked the very best questions, so I really appreciate that. And then number two, if anyone out there needs help, like go to thejobinsiders.com. It's pretty much all free, all these little guides to doing the stuff. And obviously feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn. Happy to respond anytime.
That's great. We'll share your information in our notes, Jeremy. And again, thank you so much. I feel like you shared an amazing and inspiring story that provides hope, but you've also given some practical tips to people who are really struggling. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, as well as find me at Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or you're unsure of your future and you think it's time for a change, ask yourself these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.